Hey, everybody. This is another in the Power webinar series that we are having for family law software. Today, we're going to talk about the arrearage calculator in family law software. Say that 10 times fast. And we're going to go over it in detail. This video, this webinar will be recorded, and we will put it on our YouTube channel. And you can access that either from YouTube or from our website on the training page. And we have a few more in our Power webinar series, Family Law Software A to Z. And then we're going to have a new series coming up in the late spring and summer. So look forward to that. All right, let's start. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So support arrears. The first thing that you need to know is that arrears is technically a term of art, which includes interest. So don't use arrears unless you're also including interest. And practice tip, itemize the principal and interest in any of your orders. And we make it very easy in our reports for you to see that and do that. For those states that use simple interest and not compound interest, which is more of the states, you can't get interest on interest. So you really need to separate out the principal and the interest component of the arrears. And the word arrears means that you are including interest. So be careful how you write your orders if you're not including interest. Okay, so the arrears calculator currently is found in the analysis section of our menus. We have moved it around. It is sort of a little standalone module within the program, so that it could be anywhere, but we've now found that this might be the best place for it. So it's in the arrears, in the analysis section, calculations portion of the menu, support arrears, okay? And if you are in Colorado or in Florida, we have something called plan mode and forms mode. So if you are in forms mode, and this is probably going to come to other states as well, you can see that the analysis section and the report section have disappeared from view because forms mode is designed to help make it simpler and smoother for example, paralegals to enter the data needed and generate the financial forms, the state affidavit form, if you have that. So if we go to plan mode, now you're going to see the analysis and report sections. So you have to be in plan mode in Colorado, Florida, and any other states that we implement this scheme in. Okay. So family law software computes the principal and the interest to the penny if you choose, or you can have it round, and provides supportive reports, which are complete and accurate and very useful in presenting to the court as a demonstrative exhibit or in negotiations to get these arrears amounts settled and appropriate orders entered. So there's really 3 simple steps, although there are subset steps in each of these. So the first is to enter the obligation. Support arrears will always start with what were they supposed to pay. So you will put in under obligation the amount to be paid and then the frequency. Okay. And then you're going to put the start date. If there's an end date, if not, if it's still going on, you can leave the end date blank. And then the next step here is the interest. So I'm showing you Florida here. So I can look at Florida's rates, which change and have changed frequently. And so the program will apply the rate for the dates in question. Now, if I switch to, for example, let me switch to the state of Illinois, my state, if I can remember the alphabet. And now when I go back, now I'm going to use Illinois' rates. So if you're switching the state of the judgment, for example, you want to use the rates for that state. And here you can see we haven't changed rates in a million years. We actually did change rates in the 80s, but we don't need to go back that far. So our current rate is a simple 9%. You can do this for any state. Different states have different rates. If I change this to Colorado, now when I go to the support arrears and I view the rates in Colorado, there's a few changes that have happened. So the interest rate will always be accurate if you use the right state. You can also adjust the rate. So when I view the rates, I can use the rates that I specify. And here I can change them. So let's say I only want to use a 7% rate and I want to take out all the rest of this. I could do that. And then it will just use a 7% rate. Okay. So you can adjust the rates. You can also, I'll show you some other things that you can do here. So you're going to use this. Now, what if there's more than one obligation or the obligation modified during the course of time that it was in place? So then you would go to obligation special situations. Not so special, it's pretty frequent. And you can put in the initial child support order as your description. And here it was $1,200 a month, and it started on 2017. And I'm going to go back and talk about starting principal and interest. And then let's talk about what happens if you change, if that amount changes. So I can put that in as a modification. So the original amount was $1,200, and then it modified to $1,800, and then it modified again to $1,100. And I don't have any end date, so it's still $1,100. I could do it that way, or I could put in a second obligation for the new modified amount. The advantage to doing the modifications is that if the amount for the first obligation or the second is overpaid, it doesn't roll over between separate obligations, but within one obligation with the modifications, it could roll over to apply to future payments. So this is probably the better option if it's the same obligation just being modified. But if you have a maintenance and a child support, or maybe a separate child support obligation that you want to just track separately, you can do a separate obligation. So here I've put in, instead of putting in unpaid principal as a starting principal amount, I have put in a second unpaid principal unpaid principal order. Okay. And then I've changed the frequency to one time so that this is not going to be a continuing obligation adding on. It's going to be one obligation, and any payments that are applied to obligation 2 will be applied to this balance. Okay. And I can add as many obligations as I need. One time I had a case with 68 different obligations because there were trusts and quarterly payments and annual payments. It was a lot of fun. Okay, so now, and don't be afraid to click on our help items. Click here for more information. That'll give you some helpful hints. Okay, so now we've put in the obligations. Let's go back to the main page. And the second thing we're going to do is enter any payments. So there are really three pieces to this. First, you can enter regular payments. I'm sorry, let me go up one section. Any regular payments that were made. What does that mean? That means that these are payments that were made on time over a period of time. So as opposed to those sporadic payments that just came whenever the payor felt like they had a couple of extra bucks, they'd be nice and pay their child's parent. Here, this is $1,000 a month, every month from 4/1/2018 to 7/15/2020. Cool. Then the program is going to apply all of those payments. Now, what if within that stream they missed or underpaid a payment or two? Then you can go to the second section here under payments and put in any regular payments entered above that were missed. So this is where you would put in, they missed this one in 2019. And what it's going to do is it's going to add the payment as being made, but then immediately subtract it as being missed. And I'll show you that on the printout shortly. Then the third piece is any one-time payments that were made. So these are payments that were made sporadically, or get out of jail payments, purges, tax intercepts, all of those sorts of things. So here we have one nice hefty payment made in 2021 for $11,000, maybe to get out of jail or do a contempt purge. All right. Then you can go right down to results. I always click to update results, although it works automatically, but just in case something you entered didn't get picked up, click to update, click on the help button. It'll tell you that you've got everything, okay? And then it's going to give you a breakdown of principal, interest, and the total arrears, which is principal plus interest. So here's your little total. Now, you can click for a summary report. So click here for a report. That is a summary report. I will click on it and show it to you. It's going to give you, and you can change what shows in the caption here in the title, the obligation total. This is the arrears. This is everything together. And then it's going to give you principal and interest breakdown for all of the obligations. And then this summary report will give you obligation subtotals. So for each obligation, it's going to give you the starting principal here, the principal charges, the interest or the obligation payments, and the total principal, and then the interest and the interest payments and the current interest balance. And it's going to give you that for each obligation. Then you can go down and it'll give you a summary of the interest rates. Okay. Then you can go down to the bottom and view calculation for each obligation. So now when I click on that, this is going to give me a report for obligation number 1, right? And then we'll go through and you'll see the charges of $1,200 a month continuing for quite a while. And then it changed to $1,800. And then it goes down for a while and it's going to change to $1,100. All right, so now you've got all your modifications in here. And then you'll be able to see the payments. So this column here is the payments. And if I scroll down this column, there were none. And then there were a bunch of $1,000 payments. Okay. And here we have that missed payment. So on the same date, we added $1,000 of payment, but took it away. So it shows us essentially no payment. and the balance continues to be the same, right? And as we go down, now the question becomes, where is that $1,100 payment? Where did that go? 11,000, excuse me, payment. And here we have it, $11,000. So right now it's all being applied to principal. So if I go back to my payment, you can see that there are columns for how to apply the payment. We have 3 that show up on the front page. These are the most common ways in your states that payments get applied, and you do want to use the payment application in your state. And I will get to questions. Please put in your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to get to all those. But if you have a different application of interest and principal, we're going to go to special situations for the payments. And you can see that we actually have 5 columns. So if instead of current, then interest, then principal, we apply the payments current, then principal, then interest, then when I go back, it's going to have applied those payments, and we can do the same thing for the one-time payment. So here I'm going to go into special situations, and I'm going to change this now to current, then principal, then interest. And when I go back to my detail and go down to that $11,000 payment, whoops, let me change the application. I didn't change it, sorry. The $11,000 payment, let's make it current, then interest, then principal. And now when I go back down to this $11,000 payment, you can see that $1,100 was applied to current, and then $9,900 was applied to interest. So it could impact your bottom line, how they are being applied. So you want to be careful about those applications and check your statutes, because many, if not all states, but most states will have rules for how that's applied. I'm going to look at questions to select the state and add fees. So you can add any obligation, whether it's support or not. Fees would be a one-time obligation, and you can title it attorney's fees. Again, presuming it makes interest, it earns interest. And then selecting the state, I'm going to answer that live. If I go to settings and change state of filing, and if I click that, it's going to give me the state I'm in and then all the other states, so I can change it. So I can change it to Illinois again. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the support arrears. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. I'm glad this is helpful. Thank you. This is being recorded, so you can always go back and look at it. Okay. Now, let's go on to a few other pieces of information I want to make sure you guys have. After you look at the individual obligation detail reports, you will see at the top detailed calculation of interest due. And this will give you a period by period, whatever your frequency is, a month by month operation of interest. So in Illinois, we do monthly interest. So it's going to be monthly. And it will show you whether there's 30, 31 days, 28 days in that month. So it will be accurate. Okay. And if you do the summary report, the obligation detail report, and the interest detail report, PDF them all, make a nice package, send it off to the other attorney and say, this is what your client owes. We'll expect it by Friday, right? They're going to have a hard time arguing with this level of detail, unless you made a mistake, of course. Now, the FLS has flexibility to be accurate and complete. So let's look again at the options that we have in the program. The first is that your state's interest rates are automatically applied. You can select the state if necessary for different states' rates, and you can manually adjust the interest rates if you choose, or if that's the settlement that you're offering, whatever. The payment interval options. So when you're entering the payment for frequency, there is a drop-down box. Annual. Now this says biannual, but I think of it as semi-annual. And I had an argument with our developers about this. Apparently, Webster's would consider this correct. Biannual could be every 2 years, biennial, or twice a year. So I'll just go with that. But in my mind, semi-annual. Monthly, bi-weekly, weekly, 1st and 15th, which is the same as semi-monthly, and then one time. And I showed you one time before. So what that's going to do, and we can look at obligation number 2 very quickly, because that was a one time. So you'll see here that there is a one-time charge, and then no more charges for the obligation. But because there's no payments, the interest begins accruing. So that's how the one time will work. And so for the attorney's fees question, I would do it as a one-time separate obligation. FLS does automatically apply interest in the way it accrues for your state, but you probably want to double check because with 50 states, there's 55 different rules. So we want to make sure it's accurate. If we have it wrong, let us know. But as far as the application for interest, then principal, or principal, then interest, that is a manual setting. So you want to make sure that you set that correctly for your state. Okay, at this point, I believe it's a manual setting. Okay, now the application of principles I just showed you, and you can manually apply the application of payments to the obligation. So if I go into the, not that one, the special situations, so I have more detail, you will also see here the obligation ID. So if I wanted all of these payments to only apply to obligation 2, I can do that. And then when I go back to my reports, you will see that everything changed and the obligation was applied to the payments were applied to obligation 2 with a lot of overpayment. And then what happens is, see, here's an overpayment. That overpayment isn't being applied to the other obligation, except when we go to the totals, to the summary report. And then it would be applied overall. But these are the sorts of things that you really need to be careful about, that you do this correctly. Okay, I'm going to go back in and change that so we don't mess it up. Change that back to obligation number 1. So if you use separate obligations where there's no rollover, then you can allocate payments manually to obligation 1 or obligation 2 or obligation 67, and they'll be applied appropriately. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is, and we talked a little bit about it, you can vary the rate by obligation if appropriate in your case. So you can do the interest rate separately, So when I go into obligation special situations, and I can go into and have an interest rate adjustment. So let's say as a settlement, I want to agree to reduce the interest rate. In Illinois, we use 9%. My deal with the other side will be we'll only do 7%. Okay, so I will, and I'll show you in the help, it's going to be, typically you wouldn't do it, but if you wanted to, I'm going to do a 0.2 interest rate reduction so that it's only going to do a 7% instead of a 9% interest rate. And when I go back to my report, it's for obligation 2, the interest rate is adjusted and it's only 7% instead of 9%. Okay, so there is a lot of flexibility in the program. And again, as I mentioned, if you have modifications of the obligation, you can do it as separate obligations, obligation 1, obligation 2, obligation 3, but overpayments then don't roll over, and you have to manually apply them to the right obligation. Or you can do the modifications within each obligation by going to obligation special situations, which will allow you to do those modifications. Okay. We are almost at a half hour. I want to thank everybody for your questions. If you have more questions, I am willing to stay on for a couple of minutes. And remember the practice tip that arrears means interest and principal, so don't use it. And of course, since support payments are treated as a judgment with interest applied to each payment, this can be a mathematical nightmare for those of us who are not that great at math. So the program does it for you. It does it simply and completely and accurately. Thank you so much for joining me today.